Zebulun, Elon, I, the Tetragrammaton, the Lord God Most High, I do exercise thee, and do powerfully command thee, O Spirit. Elon, I, the Tetragrammaton, the Lord God Most High, I do exercise thee, and do powerfully command.
In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast. We are the brave and the bold. Occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Abracast. I'm your host, Dr. John Towers. We're going to be talking tonight, we're going to be continuing our look at the possibility of World War III and or nuclear war. It seems like all sides are sort of revving up for it. We did an episode about this a few weeks ago, and it seemed to have gotten a little bit of traction, so I thought we would just do an update on it. So let's go. I mean, we got plenty of material to get through. I have my vessel of the art here, filled with my Jin Jihad, my weapon of mass destruction. Also, just as a little side note, today I got, oh man, it's got to be 9 weeks ago, maybe 10 weeks ago. I did an episode talking about my adventures in prepping and whatever. And at the end, we were talking about it. We did an equipment dump. We were talking about my body armor a little bit, and I got this idea to get some, morale, they call them morale patches on your gear. Like they're the little flag, like the little American flag Velcro patches to stick on your gear or on your uniform or your belt or whatever. I got the idea to get some Abracast morale patches done, and I just got them. Returned today, and they look fantastic. So I'm going to take a couple of them and put them up on the storefront. That might be done by the time this episode drops. If not, just keep your eye out on the storefront on Abracast.com. But yeah, if you want to get a good look at them, you can hit up _Abracast on Instagram. I got a couple pictures of them stuck on a patrol cap and stuck on my plate carrier and whatnot. I'm in love with them. I think they're awesome. I'm going to order some more, or I'm going to order more gear to stick on them, to stick them on right now. So, Abracast.com, check it out. Storefront's got some good stuff, some t-shirts and stickers and fucking my tarot card deck. It's got all kinds of stuff. So, we're going to start here at the New York Post. This article called "How Putin Might Use a Nuke and How We Should Respond." So I'm sure how we should respond is, who knows how the hell we're going to respond. He could use a nuke and we could send him a case of ice cream. Our economy's strong as hell. So this is by General Wesley Clark. So he might be sober-minded about this whole thing. 6 months into Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, the unthinkable has happened. Russia is losing. Vladimir Putin is determined, nevertheless, and increasingly desperate. He has undertaken a partial mobilization, formally annexed 4 regions of... Sorry about that. Of who's moving the shit when I'm not down here? And renewed his threat of using nuclear weapons. I'm not kidding. Is the threat real? And if so, how should the U.S. respond? Russia has a substantial nuclear arsenal. That's an understatement. They have the biggest nuclear arsenal in the world. They have way more nuclear weapons than we do, including strategic missiles and the bombers and a new autonomous torpedo designed to explode in harbors to create massive tsunamis. And a vessel with that weapon system is now missing. They're called the Poseidon missiles. It's like the fucking hunt for Red October. These warheads' explosive power range in the hundreds of thousands to several million tons of TNT equivalent. Russia also has more than 2,000 tactical nuclear warheads that could be fired from artillery and mortars, as well as mated to dual-purpose intermediate-range missiles like the Iskander or the Kinshai, or dropped by aircraft. These tactical warheads are expected to be the range of tens to a few thousand kilotons of power, less than what the United States dropped on Japan in 1945. Well, those were only our first 2. Come on. We were just getting warmed up. With the forces falling back in disarray, Putin has backed himself into a corner by annexing the 4 regions of Ukraine. And then ruling out any negotiated withdrawal. The unruly mobilization of some 200,000 partially or untrained men lacking proper equipment is unlikely to turn the tides on the battlefield in the immediate future, hence the rising risk that Putin will employ nuclear weapons. In Russia, in Russian exercises, in recent years, the Russian doctrine of escalate to de-escalate has been employed. 1 or more nuclear weapons is fired against, say, a Polish city, after which NATO terminates its operations rather than to respond. But NATO is not a party to the current conflict, though NATO members are helping arm, equip, and advise Ukraine. If Russia were to use nuclear weapons against Poland at some other NATO member, NATO would have little choice but to respond in kind. While NATO lacks the numbers and sophistication of Russian tactical nuclear warheads, NATO does have available some 100 aircraft-delivered nuclear bombs, as well as the US, the UK, the French nuclear missiles that could strike Russia. While some in the West have expressed fears of World War III, Putin seems unlikely to take such a profound escalation at this point, especially with China and India on the sidelines distancing themselves from his conflict and undoubtedly opposed to such a step. I heard that he's buying planes from Iran, so he's got that going for him. Got quite a axis forming over there. This leaves open the option of using tactical nuclear weapons against cities, key facilities, or choke points or actual forces in Ukraine. The U.S. exercise experience during the Cold War suggests that even pulses of multiple tactical nuclear warheads with power in the range of 10 kilotons are difficult to use effectively against maneuvering battlefield forces. I would like to see the data on those exercises. Locating targets, mating weapons to guns and launchers, and tracking the targeted forces are difficult, so the weapons often missed. What resulted was a radioactive battlefield, often rendered impassable by craters and debris and substantial risk to our own forces. Okay. I'm probably a little bit older than you, and I remember being scared pissless in the 80s. I was, in elementary and middle school. Elementary school anyway, and I remember just being terrified of nuclear war. You hear it everywhere. I mean, it was literally everywhere. Even with modern drones and GPS, and assuming Russia has modernized its warhead to achieve neutron bomb effects, achieving significant battlefield impact with a few cannon-fired weapons will be problematic. Now, when they say problematic, they don't mean like when woke people say that TV show is problematic. This really is a fucking problem. On the other hand, stationary targets like rail and road junctions, villages, or urban areas are certainly capable of being hit and destroyed, but often without any immediate tactical benefits and likely with global condemnation. I don't know about that. So Putin's threats must be seen as primarily psychological, designed to heighten the fears of World War III, sap Western resolve, reduce military assistance to the Ukraine, and encourage the voices calling for an immediate halt to military action by Ukraine. Instead, in January, prior to the conflict, Russia encouraged the 5 major nuclear powers to agree that there could be no winner in a nuclear war. Putin echoed this sentiment as late as August 1st. This was a continuation of a decade-long effort by the Soviet Union and Russia to force the West to abandon nuclear weapons development and cede nuclear superiority to the Soviet Union, and clearly designed to feed the West's anti-nuclear sentiments. So from a psychological standpoint, this is General Wesley somebody or other talking about how the response should be ordered if nuclear weapons were to be used in Ukraine by Russia. Who's to say that we would respond at all at this point? After the withdrawal in Afghanistan, and after how we've sort of been acting, we're just as likely to do nothing, I think. We would be just as likely to buckle like a fucking belt than to do anything. In my estimation, looking at our leadership, our quote leadership unquote, we're just as likely to do nothing, to be just terrified. I mean, we would send, I don't know, help. We would send them more money to launder. Hey, are your banks still working? Can we still launder this money? To accede to Putin's threats would be to abandon our principled stand against aggression and in support of the rules-based international systems and all the means that have helped check aggression in the post-World War II era. Chaos would ensue with every nuclear armed power free to attack its rivals. Pakistan, India, it would be like fucking Armageddon, dogs and cats living together. So America and our allies must not only stand firm against Putin's nuclear saber-rattling, which we are doing, but also, are we doing that? I got an article coming up about Biden out there going, it's going to be Armageddon. So are we standing fast in the face of Putin's saber-rattling, but also prepare a strong response should Russia use nuclear weapons? Ideally, this response would include international condemnation, war crimes charges directly against Putin, more sanctions, and crucially active U.S. or NATO military interventions directly against Russian forces in Ukraine. The United States should be building up its expeditionary air force capabilities in Romania and Poland to have the capability to strike and seriously degrade Russian forces, their logistics and command and control in, say, Kherson or Zaporizhia or Crimea, the Black Sea fleet sufficiently to deny Russia the capability to hold these annexed territories. So he skips the part about where we sell all of our strategic oil reserve to China. In this build-up scenario, he skips the part where we give all of our jet fuel and diesel fuel, where we sell it all to China. But in the face of Putin's threats, it is also time for the United States to call publicly for Putin to withdraw from all Ukraine and offer to broker the talks designed to secure this promptly and peacefully. Russia must account for the dead, abducted, and missing, pay reparations, and cooperate with war crimes investigations. Right. Okay, Ukraine's future security can then be arranged and the economic recovery begun. This is the right way forward. General Wesley Clark is a former NATO Supreme Allied Commander. So there seems to be some gaps here in the general's assessment of the situation and what might actually be happening. You find this on the New York Post. So he throws this term out, the escalate to de-escalate, which is Russia's nuclear deterrence strategy. So I just wanted to kind of talk about that. Escalate to de-escalate Russia's nuclear deterrence strategy. Russia's military doctrine dictates the use of nuclear weapons in response to any non-nuclear assault on Russian territory. So, blowing up pipelines, destroying bridges they're using for their logistics, arming the Ukrainians, sending them, what are we up to, $60 billion again or something like that. So the military doctrine of Russia is to use nuclear weapons in response to any non-nuclear assault on Russian territory. This encompasses a broad range of potential national security threats, including local, small-scale wars, regional or large-scale wars, internal and foreign military threats. The Russian military's budget and a host of military-related technical, political, social, and economic issues. Additionally, the doctrine defines the circumstances under which the nuclear weapons are to be used by the armed forces of the Russian Federation in response to a threat to Russia's national security. The current edition of the Russian military doctrine, when compared to the national security strategy and military doctrine published in 1993, specifically lowers the threshold under which the use of nuclear weapons is permitted, while in 93, doctrine allowed the first use of nuclear weapons only when the existence of Russian Federation is threatened. The version published since in 2000 explicitly state that Russia reserves the right to use nuclear weapons to respond to all weapons of mass destruction attacks on Russia and its allies. Furthermore, the doctrine released in 2000 and all subsequent versions allows for nuclear weapons use in response to large-scale aggression utilizing conventional weapons in situations critical to the national security of the Russian Federation. Succinctly put, Russia's entire national security strategy is predicated on the concept of nuclear de-escalation. So there's a lot of sort of legal wiggle room in these statements. Like, what is a weapon of mass destruction? Well, back in the day, a weapon of mass destruction was classified as a nuclear weapon. And then they were like, oh, also weapons of mass destruction can be yellow cake radium, dirty bombs. And then more and more items got put on. Weapons of mass destruction or Freudian slip. I need a drink of that. weapon of mass destruction could be biological, or nerve gas is a weapon of mass destruction. We live in a world where when a politician says something wrong, instead of fixing it, they go and literally change the definitions words. We're living in 1984, I swear to fucking God. So who's to say, like, well, why don't we just, we're going to change the weapon of mass destruction and say, include, the bombing of this pipeline. That's economic mass destruction. Like this one, nuclear weapons. We can use nuclear weapons to respond to large-scale aggression, utilizing conventional weapons in situations critical to the national security of the Russian Federation. What's large-scale aggression? Is it sending $60 billion to their enemy? Is sending all of the howitzers we have, sending them all to Ukraine to use against you? Is that large-scale aggression? I imagine that some lawyer somewhere can make that argument better than I could, but it seems like, yeah. So there's historical context to the NATO intervention in the Balkans. In the year before the release of Russia's 2000 military doctrine, Russian military and political leaders warily observed as NATO executed the efficient and precise conventional military operation in the former Republic of Yugoslavia in 1999. Russia was facing renewed tensions in Chechnya in the aftermath of the disastrous war that broke out following the Soviet Union's collapse. It was clear that the United States and its allies possessed far greater conventional military capabilities than Russians, plus the underlying ethnic and religious issues in Kosovo, which led to NATO seeking action, were seen by Russia as almost identical to the underlying and the First Chechnyan War. These similarities, combined with Russia's historical view of Serbia, the successor state to the Republic of Yugoslavia, as its, quote, little brother, unquote, led to Moscow developing deep anxiety that the United States would involve itself in another war within Russian borders. In 2000, Russia released the updated military doctrine, in which it outlined the concept of de-escalation through a limited nuclear strike. This idea put forth the notion that if Russia were subjected to a major non-nuclear assault that exceeded its capacity for conventional defense, it would, quote, de-escalate, unquote, the conflict by launching a limited or tactical nuclear strike. While this policy has never been publicly discussed with relation to any particular conflict, the concept of nuclear de-escalation undoubtedly was on the minds of Western leaders during the Russian invasion of Georgia in 2008 and in the ongoing conflict in eastern Ukraine. The Soviet Union's collapse and the effective end of the Cold War in the 90s let Russia and the United States with significantly less reason to fear that one would launch a massive surprise strategic nuclear attack on the other. That role the nuclear weapons played in the international geopolitical framework was fundamentally altered. Nuclear weapons no longer were the centerpiece of security relationships based on the concept of mutually assured destruction. Instead, they became a status symbol at the very most and were considered the ultimate insurance policy against unforeseen aggression. Nuclear weapons maintained their role as the penultimate security guarantee. However, they had very much moved to the background of the international security stage. Many, particularly in the West, believed that the global nuclear disarmament was an attainable goal. During the Cold War, deterrence was effective in maintaining peace between the two superpowers because both states ensured that the other would be deterred on all levels in the event of escalating tension. At the time, the security relationship between the U.S. and the USSR was heavily dependent on the concept of parity. Conventional forces were deterred with conventional forces of equal strength, while the nuclear arsenals were positioned in support of mutually assured destruction. The Soviet Union broke apart following years of economic stagnation. The United States and its allies were demonstrating their significant conventional military capabilities in the 1991 campaign to expel Iraqi occupying forces from the oil-rich state of Kuwait. Russia's military and political leaders grew increasingly wary about the imbalance to Russia's disadvantage and conventional power projection and efficacy. So, shifting security perspectives in a Cold War era, Russians' asymmetric deterrent strategy, the anxiety amongst the Russian military top brass further developed in the U.S.-led NATO 1999 intervention in Kosovo. The United States conventional military power became a clear and distinct threat to Russia. There were many similarities between the origins of Kosovo conflict and the Russia's own internal war with Chechnyan separatists during the First Chechnyan War. What Russia feared most is that the U.S. would intervene in what Russia considered its internal affairs. If the U.S. were to launch a non-nuclear, i.e. conventional assault against the newly formed Russian Federation, Russia's conventional forces would be of little benefit. As nuclear deterrence theory during the Cold War was predicated on the concept of mutually assured destruction. Deterrent strategy required that effective and credible forces were maintained at every level, conventional and nuclear, to be effective. The United States the Soviet Union's collapse decimated the military's conventional force projection capabilities. The subsequent Russian military ability to deter any conventional U.S. or NATO military actions against Russia was rendered ineffective. The efficacy of the United States' high-precision conventional weapons was demonstrated in both the Balkan and Iraq campaigns of the 90s. Unlike nuclear weapons, these precision-guided smart bombs were highly usable and effective, in stark contrast to the nuclear weapons. Framed in this context, Russian military planners became painfully aware of their strategic disadvantage. Thus, the concept of nuclear de-escalation was born. So, that's all terrifying. I think. So in the last nuclear holocaust episode, we kind of highlighted a speech that Putin made. So I thought it'd be fair to kind of highlight a speech that Biden made, where Biden invokes the possibility of Armageddon in Democratic fundraiser speech. President Vladimir Putin has indicated that the Russian using nuclear weapons in Ukraine is a possibility. Biden said in an address to the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee on Thursday night that the country under his leadership is close to Armageddon, as it has been since the Cuban Missile Crisis in the 1960s. And if you listen to this thing, he says this like he's fucking proud of it. It's so weird. It's so bizarre. Speaking at a fundraiser in New York, Biden addressed Russian President Vladimir Putin threatening to use a nuclear weapon. Putin was not joking, man, when he talks about the use of tactical nuclear weapons or biological or chemical weapons. Biden said, "We have not faced the prospect of Armageddon since Kennedy and the nuclear missile crisis." Two Democrats. It's weird. That's all that I'm saying. Russia, who both have awful foreign domestic policies, by the way. So weird. Russia has hinted several times at the possibility it could unleash weapons of mass destruction in its battle with Ukrainian forces if Putin believes the fate of the country is at risk. I want to remind you that our country also has various means of destruction, and for separate components and more modern than those of NATO countries. And when the territorial integrity of our country is threatened to protect Russia and our people, we will certainly use all the means at our disposal, Putin said in his address last month. White House officials have said that Biden administration has communicated directly with Russian officials about what kind of response using a nuclear weapon would bring, while officials have said that they aren't going to share publicly what the U.S. response would look like. They have said it would be, quote, catastrophic, unquote. I don't think there is any such thing as the ability to easily use a tactical weapon and not end up with Armageddon, Biden said Thursday at his Thursday evening speech. There's a guy by the name of Max Thornberry, Fox News. We're going to jump over to The Federalist. As Russia threatens nuclear war, who in this administration is putting America first? By a guy named William Wolf. Who is leading so as to avoid dragging the U.S. into a direct and possibly nuclear-armed confrontation with Russia over foreign soil? I don't know, but this is a question, William. But this is a question that I've been asking myself because it seems like we're running towards it. It seems like everyone's salivating to do it. Former Deputy Assistant of Defense recently asked the million-dollar question of the moment, is Ukraine worth fighting a nuclear war over? If not, we should act accordingly. If your answer to that question is by putting America's interests first, the answer is obviously no. Or the world. If this is the case that Ukraine is not worth fighting a nuclear war over, how then should the U.S. act accordingly? Reasonable responses could vary, but whatever a smart course of action might be, that's not what we have witnessed over the last 10 days from the Biden administration and the pro-war crowd. The most recent round of nuclear saber-rattling, I want $1 every time I have to read that term, started around September 21st when Russian President Putin warned, quote, in the face of the threat to the territorial integrity of our country, to protect Russia and our people, we will certainly use all the means at our disposal, unquote. He repeated a similar warning on September 30th as Russia celebrated the annexation of 4 more regions of western Ukraine, talking about the precedent set by the U.S., including nuclear weapons in World War II. When approaching this topic, some caveats and principled statements are necessary. 1. The Russian invasion of Ukraine should be condemned. 2. Putin should be taken seriously. And 3. The use of any kind of nuclear weapons, tactical or otherwise, in Ukraine or in defense of the annexed regions would be a massive escalation. Meanwhile, I like how he just throws out U.S. precedent from World War II. If they had stole the nuclear bomb plans earlier and had a nuclear weapon, are we prepared to say that Russia wouldn't have used a nuclear weapon against Germany? Is that what you're going to argue to me? American interests demand we act accordingly to avoid a nuclear confrontation with Russia. But in response to the ratcheted up rhetoric from the Russians, it appears we have lost our collective minds. Has it been decreed by the powers that be that it's worth risking a nuclear holocaust over the Donbass? It seems so. This is hilarious. Like, they're totally not taking into consideration that we are doing as much to escalate as Russia is. We are sending, I don't know what else is, I've been bitching about it for weeks now. We're sending all this money we're laundering money, but we're also sending a bunch of military supplies, arms to ammunition over there to turn on the Russians. A week ago, Sunday, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan told Face the Nation that we have communicated directly, privately, and at very high levels to the Kremlin that any use of nuclear weapons will be met with catastrophic consequences for Russia, and that the U.S. and our allies will respond decisively, and we have been clear and specific about what that will entail. Sullivan doubled down on this line this past Friday during a White House press briefing when asked, would the U.S. actively enter the war if Putin used nukes on Ukraine? He didn't say no. He didn't say. That would be up to the Congress since they have the constitutional authority to declare war. No, he repeated that we have the opportunity to communicate directly to Russia a range of consequences for the use of nuclear weapons and the kinds of actions the United States would take. Given that such an attack wouldn't be on the U.S. or NATO, just what consequences is the Biden administration at liberty to dispense without a formal declaration of war from Congress? Well, we've seen that he is not waiting around for stuff to be done in Congress. He's out there writing executive orders. He's just saying that he's going to do stuff, even though it's anti-constitutional. This is the new catchphrase that I've been hearing. It's post-constitutionalism. We're after that. That's the old shit. We're now post-constitutionalism. The constitutional question didn't seem to trouble a former CIA Director General David Petraeus on ABC this week, either. In response to the nuclear question, he told co-anchor Jonathan Karl, just to give you a hypothetical, we would respond by leading a NATO and collective effort that would take out every Russian conventional force that we can see and identify on the battlefield in Ukraine and also in Crimea and every ship in the Black Sea. Terrifying. Karl rightly noted that this would bring America and NATO into the war. Yes, it would. Into the war. Just like that. Congress and Constitution be damned. Who's putting America first? In light of all this brinksmanship, I have to ask, because it seems like no one else is, who is putting American interest first? Who in the cadre of our adults that are back in charge is leading in such a way as to avoid dragging the U.S. into a direct and possibly nuclear armed confrontation with Russia over foreign soil? It has been little more than a year since, here we go, Biden's disastrous Afghanistan withdrawal, and a lingering reminder that we have precious little to show for our last 20 plus years of foreign adventurism and failed exercises in nation building. Sacred democracy isn't an export every country wants to take at the end of a gun. Far too many American lives were lost in the Middle East and far too many freedoms at home. Here, during the war on terrorism. So I think I speak on behalf of most of my fellow Americans when I say not a single drop of American blood should be spilled on Ukrainian soil. While the military-industrial complex might be thrilled at the prospects of a hot war in Ukraine, as they ride the irresponsible riverboat of billions of dollars in aid, the American citizens are rightly wondering how any of this spending, any of this rhetoric, or any of this warmongering helps them put cheaper food on their tables and gas in their tanks. It's actually working diametrically opposed to those goals. Ukraine is not a NATO ally. For that, we should be eternally grateful. Yet, even as Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky stages his made-for-TV NATO application signing, we must be frank. Ukraine has no business being in NATO. This is very conversation about the possible use of nuclear weapons, and an American response underscores that reality. Let us ask, what if Russia were to use tactical nuclear weapon on the day or on the battlefield in Ukraine? To be clear, that would be disastrous and deadly escalation in an already ill-fated war. Yet even if Russia did What possible benefit could there be for the U.S. and the American citizens by responding in kind? None whatsoever. The same goes for an overwhelming or catastrophic conventional response. Why are our leaders so confident Putin would be willing to suffer a serious strike than to back down? The hubris beggars believe. One of the things I admired most about former President Orange Man while serving in the State Department in the Pentagon during his administration was his restraint. Whether it was in our pursuit of real diplomacy with the belligerent nuclear power in North Korea, or refusing to escalate in response to the Iran shooting down of one of our surveillance drones, Trump displayed strength through restraint, power through prudence. And now is a time for restraint. Now I can already hear the neocon accusations of this posture being pro-Putin, getting drafted over at the Dispatch, to which I say, let the Dispatch and the DC Beltway boo. If the Beltway is booing, the Heartland is cheering, and I'm sure most New Yorkers would be cheering along with the Heartland too, if it means they won't be witnessing a mushroom cloud rising over Manhattan anytime soon. So we're sliding into politics here. I'm going to stick with it for a little bit, but I might ditch out of this article. Believe it or not, we don't do politics. When we talk about World War III and the upcoming impending nuclear holocaust, it's actually because we're living in history. We need to understand why these things are happening. It's not just to smear one thing or another. That's why we don't really talk about polls and all this kind of nonsense either. So let's see where this is going. But some may argue this kind of bluster is what's necessary to ensure real nuclear deterrence. James Traub at Foreign Policy records that former Secretary of State John Foster Dulles once boasted of his gifts at nuclear blackmail, saying, "Some say that what were brought to the verge of war. Of course, we were brought to the verge of war. The ability to get to the verge without getting into the war is the necessary art." That's quite a statement. Such diplomacy may be an art, one that requires real skill, but allow me to indulge one half of another hypothetical here. Even if it were worth it for America to counter a nuclear strike in Ukraine, does anyone seriously think this administration is the one that can be trusted to pull this off? Discretion is the better part of valor. Doubly so when incompetence defines your operations. There is no John Foster Dulles or even a nuclear equivalent serving in our national security apparatus. The truth that few seem willing to state clearly is this: nuclear brinksmanship over Ukraine puts America last. Ukraine is Europe's problem, not ours, and we are the only nation with nuclear weapons that might defend Ukraine. What about the United Kingdom? What about France? When it comes to our domestic priorities, the only party who stands to gain from America either fully entering the war in Ukraine or returning nuclear fire on Russia is China, China, China. There is no doubt that the Chinese Communist Party is cheering on this development with as much eager anticipation as the forever war uniparty here at home. I would love to play Risk against Joe Biden, and I've leveled this offer before when he's there and he's talking about how he was a professor and he got triple degrees and majors and all this stuff. He literally was like, "I am smarter than you and I can do more push-ups than you." It's a growing section in the featured topic link about Biden. Again, not necessarily politics. It's like, the guy's it's a wild story. This guy's a plagiarist. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Nowadays, he doesn't even know what room he's in or how to get out of it or how to get off the stage. And I said I would do any intelligence test against Joe Biden. Tic-tac-toe. I would love to play Joe Biden in Risk. Me and one more just dude versus Joe Biden in Risk. Without all of his, even if he had his advisors, that would be even funner. That would be even funner to do. Still, there is no need to let the beating of the nuclear war drums march us into an unwinnable disaster that may yield radioactive consequences on our own soil. Plugs. Biden says that there is not 1 inch of NATO territory that we won't defend. Fine, but Ukraine is not in NATO. Joe, duh. Thus, there is not an inch of Ukrainian soil that is worth risking a nuclear strike on our home soil over. Not one. All right, so I'm going to bail out of this. I had a couple more to get into, but I must have babbled. It must have ran long. I'm going to get out of these. Maybe we'll hit these next time. So, I'm John Towers, and this is the Abracast. Hey, now's a good time to prep, to get some... what have I been saying? Now is the time where you can do the job of the first sergeant. Now is the time where you can solidify up some of your supplies. You can get some extra beans, extra bullets, extra Band-Aids. That's the first sergeant's job. Now is the time for that. I meant to mention at the last episode, the cold winter episode, about trying to grab some space heaters or something, just in case. Like, now's the time to do that. When the shit hits the fan, you can become the platoon leader. But now we need to be the company commander. But now is the time to be the first sergeant. Now is the time to get all your shit together. And when I get your shit together, you know what you need. You need some Abracast morale patches for your body armor you're going to be going to buy. So check out the storefront. Maybe I'll get those up tonight. I'm John. This is the Abracast. Thank you guys very much. We'll see you soon.